Hello, my name is Marion Ebel. I'm a Senior Policy Manager at Lighting Europe, and I'm here to speak to you about the concerns of the lighting industry regarding product compliance online and how we think this should be addressed, in particular in legislation. If you've listened to my presentation a year ago, please don't leave this recording. You will see that a lot of things happened since then, and I have a lot of updates for you. But before we dig into the topic, let me just give you a few information about Lighting Europe for those who might not know us very well. So Lighting Europe is a trade association based in Brussels that represents lighting product manufacturers across Europe. We have a mixed membership made of companies and national associations. Altogether, we stand for around 1,000 companies from across Europe, 100,000 jobs, and around 20 billion annual turnover. In 2019, we reassessed our strategic roadmap, which is to deliver the value of lighting to society by 2025. Our assessment is that we are making good progress. The industry is harnessing the potential of LEDification and sustainability. We are delivering more energy efficient, sustainable products, and that the increase of value to society will now come from lighting systems and also human-centric lighting. And to achieve that value for people, but also for the industry, you need a healthy regulatory framework, which means simple, sound rules that are better enforced. At Lighting Europe, we have 4 main working groups that are working on a list of priorities, and in particular to make sure that, as I mentioned before, we have sound and simple rules that are easy to understand, play and enforce, and that help create a business environment in Europe, that we deliver the value of lighting through intelligent lighting systems and human-centric lighting, that we implement the circular economy thinking by supporting the industry and shaping rules that reflect the value of lighting, and that we ensure the better enforcement of EU rules to ensure safe, quality products for users and a level playing field for the industry. And this is in particular this working group that is working on the case of product non-compliance online. To bring just a bit of context and to follow on the presentation I made last year, just to give you some data, the problem of non-compliance online is very wide. It is, of course, a problem of product safety, but not only. We see a lot of non-compliance with energy efficiency requirements, no energy label, but also with sustainability requirements, environmental requirements, such as WEEE requirements. The OECD, in one of its recent reports, estimated, for instance, that 5 to 10% of the electrical equipment put on the market was not complying with WEEE requirements. Eucolite, for instance, the association conducted a multinational study into non-compliance of products sold online in 2019. They scanned 3,000 products available for sale in 10 different countries, and the result showed an exceptionally high level of non-compliance with national WEEE requirements. It was very clear for a very wide range of product groups, but particularly for LED lamps, for which they estimated that there is 78% to 100% of non-compliance with WEEE requirements. Another couple of data, it's estimated that 1 in 4 imported products are non-compliant with chemical legislation such as REACH and CLP. And in 2018, the French Market Surveillance Authority tested 15 lighting chains, which proved that 100% of the products were non-compliant, and even 67% of them were actually also dangerous. At Lighting Europe, we just concluded our very own mystery shopping exercise with the objective to establish the rate of non-compliant lighting products sold online via marketplaces that make these products available to European end users. So we checked 2 types of products, GLS replacement lamps and desktop luminaire with integrated LED lamp. We checked 4 platforms in 5 different member states with the help of our members in France, Poland, Netherlands, Italy, and Spain. We focused on EU mandatory requirements. So we didn't test products. The mystery shoppers only carried out visual inspections of the information on the webpage and then ordered and received the lighting products that they for which they inspected the information on the packaging and the product itself. So the conclusion of our mystery shopping exercise was that only 8% of the lighting products that the algorithm proposed to our mystery shoppers complied with mandatory information obligations under the EU law. Out of the 30 products delivered to their doorsteps, 77% didn't comply with EU mandatory obligations. Some products didn't have a CE mark, even though they were sold on websites clearly targeting the EU market. Others were not registered with a WE scheme and did not contribute to the cost of collection and recycling at the end of life. To show you a few examples that you can see are very telling. So this is one example of the products that we ordered and received. You can see no information whatsoever and not complying with any of the different characteristics we checked and that you can see on the right of the screen. And the second one, when you can see we even received it with a completely blank packaging. And as you can imagine, this is really not compliant with EU rules. So the question is, how do you actually address this issue? We believe that the EU legislation is really key in making sure that end users, consumers and customers can only access safe and quality products on the EU market. A key piece of legislation that is now still nowadays, until the new revision is adopted, regulating online marketplaces and platforms, is the e-commerce directive. So the e-commerce directive was adopted in 2000, so quite an old piece of legislation. And a few years ago, Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the Commission, when she presented her guidelines to the European Parliament, she explained that she had one objective, which was to revise the e-commerce directive, which again is setting the ground rules for online platforms, online marketplaces, the type of liability they have, in which situations, and so on. She said that we should revise it, make sure that we have a new so-called Digital Services Act to upgrade our liability and safety rules for digital products, services, and platforms. So last year, at the end of December, a few weeks maybe even a few months after I recorded my first presentation on the topic, the Commission published the draft Digital Services Act. So the objective of the legislation is to address any type of platform and any type of content that it has on the platform. The process in Brussels follows the usual co-legislation process, which means that once a proposal is published by the Commission, it is then sent over to European Parliament and the Council, where all the member states are represented, so that they both form their own position based on the Commission's proposal. And then once this is done, they all meet at the end in a so-called trilogue negotiations, where they need to negotiate and merge into one final position that will then be endorsed by all EU institutions. The key actors I just mentioned, so of course the European Commission. In the European Commission, it is the unit in charge of everything digital, if I can put it like that is leading on the Digital Services Act, but of course liaising with DG GROW, which is the department that deals the internal market issues. Also, I could have actually added DG Justice, so they are dealing with all the topics related to consumer policy and of course product safety, so there is a link there. In the European Parliament, there is one committee that is leading on the topic, and this is the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee. So now to explain to you a bit what is in the Digital Services Act. So maybe before I do that, let me come back very briefly to the e-commerce directive that I mentioned before. You had, at least in this context, two very important core principles in the directive, which were that. For intermediary service providers, as long as they act, for instance, as a hosting service, they are not liable for the content they host. Secondly, they cannot be asked to monitor everything they have on their websites. Here, of course, the legislation such as the DSA applies to any types of platforms, but I'm going to speak about marketplaces, so it's easier because you understand that our issue is linked to product. So basically an online marketplace on which non-compliant products are sold if there is an issue and there is no one in the EU that can be held liable, because that's a case that very often happens, especially when you have sellers from outside of the EU, then you cannot go back to the online marketplace and tell them, well, please help us and make sure that, you know, we resolve everything. You cannot claim damage, you know, to online marketplaces, because they are not considered as a liable economic operator, since they are only acting as an intermediary. The prohibition of general monitoring means that they cannot be asked to scan every product every day that they have on their platform to check if they are compliant or not with EU legislation before they actually sell them on their platform. So these were two core principles that were in the e-commerce directive, and that the new Digital Services Act also includes in its draft. Something about, as LightingEurope, I have to say we were quite disappointed about, because we think that part of the problem also relies on that, on the fact that, you know, every actor of the value chain should play its role, and that online marketplaces or platforms that sell products in the end have a responsibility towards the content they upload and they offer for sale. But in the draft piece of legislation that was published by the European Commission, these two principles were still in the draft. The reasoning of the Commission was to say that they would keep these core principles, but they will add new obligations for platforms. And for that, they have established 4 different categories. So ISP, so any kind of intermediary service provider, hosting services, online platforms, and very large online platforms. So to explain to you how it works, so as I said, there are 4 categories with different obligations each time. You have basic obligations for all ISPs. So the super wide, let's say, definition of intermediary service providers. So they keep the core principles I mentioned before. Online platforms are exempted from liability as long as they operate as a, for instance, hosting service. They cannot be asked to do general monitoring obligation. On top of it, the Commission asks now them to have a point of contact for communication with national authorities. They should also make sure that those that are not established in the EU have a legal representative in the EU that can be held liable for compliance, but not for compliance with EU legislation, for instance, product compliance, but for compliance with the rules under the DSA, which is a very important point to mention. Another, for instance, to give you an idea, obligation, they must report on their content moderation activities at least once a year, except for micro and small companies. Then, for the category of hosting services, which is one category within the ISPs, on top of the basic requirements I mentioned before, they need to put in place user-friendly mechanisms for individuals or entities, of course, to notify illegal content. So for instance, the notices should include the reasons for non-compliance, the location, the URL, identity of the individual or company notifying, and a good faith belief statement. On top of these obligations I mentioned, online platforms, still again part of the ISPs and also encompassing hosting services, need to make sure that they put in place an internal complaints handling system, that they participate to dispute resolution in the context, for instance, of a North-South dispute, that they give priority treatment to the so-called trusted flaggers. So that would be entities that have been given a stamp that, you know, if they notify something to the platforms, they can be considered, the process can be quicker to remove the products because they are considered as a trusted entity that can actually, you know, check products online and give their own assessment. They need these online platforms to suspend the provision of services in case of repeated tentatives, when they see that traders, you know, try several times to provide illegal content online. And they also need to check some information from the trader that wants to use their services. And finally, we come to the 4th category, which is very large online platforms that have basically all the obligations I mentioned before, plus additional ones specifically for them. So the very large online platforms, and you will probably wonder, how do you actually, no, it's a very large online platform. What is the threshold? So the Commission so far put the threshold as a platform that reaches 45 million users in the EU. And why 45? Because it represents 10% of the overall European population, which means that there will be updates from time to time for this threshold to make sure that it continues to represent 10% of the population. As you can imagine, population is right now growing. It will need an update in the future. So these very large platforms, they need to conduct risk assessments on the systemic risk brought about by or relating to the functioning and use of their services. They need to take reasonable, effective, and proportionate measures to mitigate those risks. They need to submit themselves to an external and independent audits at least once a year. They need to have a compliance officer, again here, not to check the compliance of the products, but to make sure they comply with the obligations under the DSA. And they have specific reporting obligations. So you can see that the Digital Services Act is a very horizontal piece of legislation, a huge one, that is aimed at applying to all types of platforms. So in our case, we are talking about online marketplaces, but of course, it's also the case for social media, for instance, and to different types of content. By content, they also mean the products. So anything that could be uploaded basically on these platforms. In our case, it's products, but it can also be videos on social media and so on. So it is a piece of legislation that is trying to address different kinds of problems with kind of a horizontal solution for all of them. As LightingEurope, since the beginning and already before actually the legislation was published, we advocated for a reinforcement of the rules and a change of the regime that existed under the e-commerce directive. One particular point, and I mentioned it already a few minutes ago, is the problem we have when especially you have someone selling from outside of the EU that, for instance, do not comply with EU rules. And then in this case, you very often end up with no economic operator in the EU that would be liable. And in this situation, very often, it's actually the consumer that is technically importing the product and is technically liable for the compliance of the product. So basically, the consumer has no one to turn to get damages in case of problem. And we also think, as I mentioned before, that the problem, of course, goes beyond, just product safety. It's also about making sure that we apply the energy efficiency rules, for instance, sustainability requirements, because if not, it also, in a way, undermines the credibility of EU rules if not all actors present on the market apply them. It, of course, also impacts the competition on the market. And a few years ago, we've done an internal survey and we noted that our members invest up to 25% of annual turnover in making sure they comply with rules. So of course, it's definitely unfair competition if some actors in a way are allowed to sell non-compliant products because the legislation doesn't evolve and others, make all best efforts to comply with it. So one very important point for us was to make sure that you update the e-commerce directive regime and you actually make marketplaces liable if there is no importer in the EU. So it would not be necessarily in all cases, but in case there is no economic operator in the EU and in particularly importers, then the online marketplaces has to basically take up the role of the importer and becomes liable with the same rules that would apply to a regular importer in the EU. What is very important for us as well is that we make sure that the products are compliant before they're actually placed on the marketplace. So in the DSA, you have a requirement, so-called know your business customer requirement, to collect some information from the trader before the products are placed on the marketplace. And this is very important for us. First of all, we think that it's not just about collection, but also checking the information that is shared, that it should be updated, but also that these verifications should really take place before a product is put on the marketplaces to avoid that during the time that these checks are done, the products can be sold to end users. And then, again, this just creates more and more non-compliant products on the market. So that's a very important point for us. And there are some tools that can be used as well to check that. There are some existing databases. We have the V81, we now have the Ebel database as well, and EPR registers as well allow to do some checks. From a reactive point of view as well, we think it's very important that if in the end still some non-compliant products remain on platforms and there is a notification, it is considered that indeed the notification is correct and the product is non-compliant, online marketplaces should make sure that they remove the products as soon as possible, if possible within 24 hours, that they inform consumers that they have bought a product that is non-compliant, which is also an idea that has been taken up by some of the other institutions, and of course that they collaborate with market surveillance authorities. To give you some idea a bit of how it is going in the other two institutions, because as I mentioned before, now that the Commission has published its proposal, it is now waiting for the Parliament and the Council, so all the member states, to adopt their own position before they can all negotiate the final proposal. So in the European Parliament, you have one lead committee, which is the Internal Market and Consumer Protection, and one lead MEP, who is Christel Schaldemose, who is from Denmark. And she's leading this work together with a few other MEPs called shadows in Brussels language. And together they have the task to come up with a new proposal and to amend the legislative proposal of the Commission to make sure that they represent as much as possible the best interests, of course, of EU citizens. So MEP Schaldemose, she published a first draft report back in May, which is a report that we very much welcomed, because we were very happy to see that, she took on board a lot of the messages that industry has been saying about you need to, adopt rules to make sure that there are no non-compliant products on the EU market. And I know as well that this is also a problem very close to her heart. She's really keen on, for instance, making progress on product safety. So we were happy to see that she made proposals to actually amend the liability regime, not for all platforms, but for, a category that could be broader than marketplaces, that is called basically platforms that facilitate distance sales contracts with consumers, with the idea that the liability exemption for these platforms would not be possible if there is no economic operator in the EU, and also if the product doesn't comply with the relevant product safety or other union law. So we saw that as a very positive step towards addressing this loophole that we have in EU legislation, and without which we couldn't really make a change and make a difference, in the market in the coming years. She's also proposing to, strengthen some of the traceability obligations, so the Know Your Business consumer obligation I mentioned before, and that on top of just checking information about the trader, you also check information about the product itself. To give you a bit of an idea of where we are in the process, because now it's been almost a year that the legislation has been proposed. So a lot of progress has happened in the European Parliament. As I mentioned before, a draft report was published in May. After that, the process within the committee is that all the other members of the European Parliament actually propose their own amendments. And then the lead MEP, together with her shadow, so who represent the different political groups in the Parliament and in the committee, are trying to draft compromise amendments, so to merge the different amendments and to come up with a position to be adopted first in this small committee, and then by the European Parliament as a whole in a plenary session. And we're now at a stage where they are finalizing the final version, let's say, of their reports to be submitted to a vote not anymore on the 9th of December, but on the 13th. Just got the information before this recording, and with an attentive vote in plenary for January 2022. In the council, so where you have all the representatives of member states, they are progressing at a similar pace, I would say, or slightly quicker than the European Parliament. Here, they adopt their position that is called the general approach. They have adopted it, on the 25th of November this year. And this would allow all institutions in the Parliament manages to keep up with the deadlines it sets to have a negotiation at the beginning of 2022. So the position of the Council that has been published is has positive aspects, according to us, in some ways, but also negative ones, obviously. One that we are very disappointed about is the fact that they have not decided to address the liability issue. So and the issue of having, in some cases, no economic operator in the EU that could be held liable for product non-compliance. So that's something that we deeply regret. But we also know that some member states raised the issue and asked for this point to be rediscussed during the next stage of the negotiation. So for sure, we'll liaise with them to explain again, how big of a problem it is, and just to see our mystery shopping results, how easy it was for us to find products that do not comply with EU rules. On the positive side, a good thing is that they strengthened the Know Your Business customer obligation. For instance, by making sure that there are verifications that are actually done before a product is placed online, that you have specific deadlines. So that is a very positive development. And as I mentioned before, they also require online marketplaces to inform the person that bought an illegal good that this has been done, because this is of course very important, not to because that could educate in a way the people that buy, and of course in case of potential danger and links to product safety. As Lighting Europe, we've been extremely active on this topic. We've been discussing with a lot of members of the European Parliament, a lot of member states, to, as I mentioned before, explain the issue, how easy it is to actually access non-compliant products, and the importance it has for the industry, for the citizens, but also just to make sure that it doesn't undermine the value and the impact of EU rules. And this is not a problem that is specific only to lighting. It's a problem that is exists for many different other industry, but also different actors. And we joined forces back in November with other industry associations, so the toys industry, also brands association that represents big industries, but also with NGOs, consumer representative, to explain the issue and to show that this is not just something that is valid for one of two stakeholders, but that the problem is really important and that it needs to be addressed. And one of the reasons also why we insist so much is that the same way that the e-commerce directive was, let's say, the core legislation that is regulating online platforms in the EU, the same will apply to the DSA. And now we've updated it after 20 years. Of course, we can expect that the DSA will be revised more often than the e-commerce directive was. But now is the time to do it. It's not, we are not in a position to just delay and say, no, but this is horizontal. We've done what we could. Let's do it in another piece of legislation. This is the core piece of legislation that's gonna legislate online platforms, including their liability regime in terms of content moderation. So we really think it's really important to address it there. On top of the Digital Services Act, there are a couple of other legislation that we follow that can also be linked to this debate, and that's the revision of the General Product Safety Directive, which is now a regulation, which is a horizontal legislation addressing product safety, as you can read, and that is basically a general basic requirements for any product that is placed on the market to have certain safety requirements taken into consideration, certain criteria for the risk assessment, and so on. The same way, the Compliance and Enforcement Regulation, which is a new market surveillance legislation, was published now a couple of years ago and entered into force last July. So these are different legislation that we follow that are linked, but that cannot replace the core principles that are in the Digital Services Act. Again, why it's so important for us. On top of what can be done in legislation, of course, there is a very important role of the market surveillance authorities. They're of course part of the solution, but we know as well that their resources are limited, and they're for sure not commensurate to the volume of items that need to be checked and tested, and to the amount of rules that apply to products on the market. And we have new rules every year, so of course, considering the resources they have now, it is not possible for them to check everything. As Lighting Europe, we try to help as well. On top of the advocacy we do in legislation, we are also involved in an EU project called EEP Line 3, which is bringing together different market surveillance authorities to evaluate the and assess, check certain types of products, including lighting products, against the new single lighting regulation and energy labeling rules, and see, how well these rules are actually enforced. So this is a project very important for us as well, and in which we're involved, and it's actually ongoing. The working party dedicated to lighting products started its activities just this year in September. We are also developing guidelines as Lighting Europe. We just published in June 2021 version 4 of our guidelines on eco-design and energy labeling, and in July the version 2 of our April database guidelines. You can expect a version 5 of the eco-design and energy labeling regulation rules to be published in Q1 2022. This will be the last revision of the guidelines. And as you know, they are free for our members. If you are interested, feel free to check Lighting Europe's website. You can find all the information there and a point of contact if needed. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. If you have any comments, questions, feel free to reach out to me. You have my email address indicated on this slide. Thank you very much.